welcome to this lesson for higher biology, which today is going to be looking at photosynthesis. So we're specifically going to be looking at the stages of photosynthesis, understanding the use of hydrogen and ATP. So you need to be able to describe how light energy is used by chlorophyll, state the fate of the products produced in the first stage of photosynthesis, describe what's happening in the Calvin cycle, including the roles of RuBP, carbon dioxide, Rubisco, the intermediates G3P, ATP and NADPH, and then give the possible fates of the sugar produced during photosynthesis. So to give a very quick overview of what's happening in photosynthesis, you can see here we've got the two different types of reactions. We've got the light dependent reactions, which are taking light energy and we're using that to pass on the light energy to chlorophyll. That gives us chemical energy, and that's really in the form of electrons, and we're going to come on to that in a second. We also have that light energy being used to split water into its constituent parts. So we've got oxygen, which diffuses out of the chloroplast, and we've got hydrogen, which is used in the second stage. Our light independent reactions then are taking in carbon dioxide, which is coming into the chloroplast. We're using that hydrogen from the first stage. We're using some ATP energy produced in the first stage, and this results in what we call carbon fixation, or combining carbon with other molecules to form specific organic compounds. So to bring us on to the first stage, what's happening in those light dependent reactions? Well, if this is a diagram of our chloroplast, we have photosynthesis taking place in here. We've got mostly taking place in the grana of the chloroplast, which are these flattened discs here that are all stacked up in this. So we've got our light coming in, being absorbed by the pigments that are present in the grana of the chloroplast. So in our first stage, what's actually happening? Well, if we consider this to be our membrane of the grana of the chloroplast, so this is outside the grana and this is inside, and we have our chlorophyll pigment. So our light energy is being absorbed by that chlorophyll pigment. That excites our electrons, and what's happening there is the excited electron is being carried into the membrane where it meets a primary electron acceptor. That primary electron acceptor then passes these high energy electrons along an electron transport chain, and that has the consequence of also pumping our hydrogen from outside the membrane to inside the membrane. This energy can also be used to split water. So we've got our water molecules, and that's going to be split into oxygen and hydrogen. And as we've said, the hydrogen is going to be used in our next stage. So that's picked up by NADP to form NADPH, and that's taken on to the second stage of photosynthesis. Now, those of you who remember respiration will have spotted the ATP synthase enzyme over here. And what it's doing is it's taking these hydrogen ions that have been pumped across the membrane using the energy from our electron, and it's taking those hydrogen ions in order to activate our ATP synthase enzyme and produce ATP from ADP and PI. So that ATP is also going to be used in our second stage, which is the Calvin cycle. So in the carbon fixation stage, we're going to start off with two new molecules. We've got RuBP, or ribulose biphosphate, and an enzyme called Rubisco. Now, RuBP is involved in combining with carbon dioxide, and when they do that, that is catalysed by this enzyme Rubisco. So the reaction between these two molecules is catalysed by this enzyme. Now when they combine, they are phosphorylated, and this produces a molecule called 3-phosphoglycerate, or just referred to as an intermediate. That 3-phosphoglycerate is then joined by the hydrogen from NADPH from our second stage, and it's also phosphorylated by some ATP. That produces another molecule called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, or G3P as you guys can know it. That G3P is then used to produce some sugar, and it may also be used to regenerate some RUBP. So we're removing some of our carbon from here to produce our sugar molecules, and the rest of it remains to be transformed back into RUBP to allow the cycle to start all over again. Now, the sugar that is involved in photosynthesis can be converted to a number of different elements within the plant. So it may be used immediately as an energy source for respiration. It may be converted into starch, which is a storage carbohydrate, or it may be converted into cellulose, which is a structural carbohydrate, for example, being produced into a cell wall. It may also be passed on to other biosynthetic pathways, where it might be used to make fats or oils, nucleic acids like DNA and RNA, or it might in fact be used to make proteins. So from that, you should be able to state the fate of all the products of the first stage of photosynthesis, describe what's happening in the Calvin cycle, including the roles of RUBP, carbon dioxide, Rubisco, the intermediates, G3P, ATP and NADPH, and you should be able to give the possible fates of the sugar that is produced during photosynthesis.